So maybe we should get started. It's a couple minutes after 1. I just want to
Okay,
remind everyone, welcome Carol. I want to remind everyone that John Harris is doing his regular history book discussion in a short time. It's May 10th. I think that's, no, that's not, his is on May 13th, Thursday at 2 p.m. The book is John Meacham's book about John Lewis called His Truth is Marching On. So I hope you can come, or if you know anyone interested in history, let them know about it. It should be really interesting. John wanted to do it last season, but there were not enough copies. It was a brand new book, so I'm hoping there are copies now available. You might also be interested, we're doing a couple fun preservation history programs. One will be on the school that we all pass when we're driving up here that we used to pass in on the way north in the Moor. It's an old Belgian heritage school that's being renovated to look like it was around 1900. So they're going to talk about that on May 10th at 2 o'clock. And then later in the month, near the end of the month, we're going to have one on the granary and what they're doing. And Beth Renstrom, who's the director of that project, is going to come and tell us about it. From what I've seen in the little video, it's going to be pretty spectacular. So I hope you can join us for those programs. And then I wanted to throw out there.
Before we start, sorry.
Yeah.
Before we start, I'm sorry. My name's Bonnie Chartier. I just wanted to introduce myself.
Hi.
Because I live over in town. I live in Marinette County.
Okay.
I work at the Peshtigo Library, and I had just been online a couple months ago looking to see what everybody's doing, and found about 4 different libraries in Door County who are doing online book clubs. So I horned in on Egg Harbor's book club last month and saw you guys were talking about Hamnet, which I had read. So I hope you don't mind that I've joined in.
Not at all. We welcome everyone.
Great.
A lot of our members are in Florida on and off and other far-flung places. So Marinette's not too far away. Welcome.
I'd like to do one other interruption too. I'd like to introduce my friend Carol Hoyam. Carol's in one of the suburbs of Chicago right now as we are Zooming, but I met her in Florida, but she has a house on Detroit Island. And so she has Door County connections too. So, and she likes to read and she likes to talk and she's a smart gal.
Well, I hope you'll both join us in the future. You're always welcome. And it looks like from our experience that we're going to be doing some sort of hybrid live and in online programming in the future, since it seems to allow people who are far away to join us. So keep your eyes open and join us for more of the programs that we have. So welcome to the new people. I did want to say that if anyone remembers reading that, I mentioned last time, The White Tiger by Adiga. Is it Adiga Aravind? We read that some time ago, and that was made into a film, which I thought was excellent if you have Netflix. And it was up for an Academy Award, and it was up for a couple BAFTA, the British Academy Awards. They didn't win, but it's really worth watching because since we're multicultural, it really shows you India. And of course, India is unfortunately in the news right now, but that gives you some sense of it, both from the book itself, the story itself, and also the film. So I'd recommend that if you happen to have Netflix. I'm trying to get it for the library and DVD. So far, no luck. So then let's get started. I just want to throw out there that this subject, Shakespeare's one of my favorite subjects. When I went to school in England, I went to the Royal Shakespeare Company constantly. And actually, when I was there in 1970s, I went to hear a talk by Sam Wanamaker, an American actor and director, who was trying to raise money to rebuild the Globe Theater. And then I was lucky enough to go back with my children around 2000, and the Globe Theater was there. So we went to a play there, and we actually donated money to buy a tree. So I have fond memories of that sort of thing. So I've mentioned to everyone in the email I sent out about the program that's available on Hoopla with Michael Wood, who gives a really in-depth history of Shakespeare from and some of the theories surrounding who he was and what he did in his life. So Jane told me she watched the first one. Was it a little too in depth for you, Jane?
Yeah, I am, I'm not, I must admit, I'm not very knowledgeable about Shakespeare, like some of my more Shakespearean acquaintances and friends here, but yeah, I thought it was pretty deep, but I'll give it a shot again.
Well, it is, as I say, it's available on Hoopla, 4 parts, so it would be 4 checkouts, but I find it fascinating. There's so many theories about what happened to Shakespeare, and of course, we have one in this book, or a sort of fictionalized theory, but he does trace what he feels is valid with documents and locations, and it really brings the whole thing to life, even if you don't agree with his theory. I know I started reading about the different people who think Shakespeare was Shakespeare, and so Shakespeare was not who he was, and like Derek Jacobi, the actor, is on the side that thinks it must have been someone else. So there's so many theories out there. It kind of opens up the door for a lot of fun in a way and speculation. But the fact is, these plays exist. So somehow they came to us. And that's what is intriguing. Maggie O'Farrell herself is from Northern Ireland, born in Northern Ireland. She lives in Edinburgh now. Her husband's an author. I get carried away with things. It turns out her husband is an author named William Sutcliffe, and he wrote a book called Whatever Makes You Happy. And they turned that into a film on Netflix also called Otherhood. So if you get carried away like me, go have a look at it. It's kind of fun. It's about another thing where it's mothers and kids. In that case, it's a bunch of mothers who were friends in a children's play group where their kids played together. And then the kids grow up and go away, and the mothers are still friends. So they all try to chase down the boys as they're older. So it's a little silly, but it's also fun. That's the husband of Maggie O'Farrell. And she has won a couple of prizes for this book. A lot of them literary prizes, like Women's Prize in Fiction, that sort of thing. It turns out the book has been optioned for a movie, so we can look forward to that. The production company that's doing it is called Hera Pictures, Hera, after the goddess. And that motion picture studio stands for Strength, Independence, and Femininity. Why do you think they chose this book? So that should be fun to look forward to that. And I want to just throw one more thing out there. I know I mentioned it last time. I'm obsessed with a movie called All Is True, which was Kenneth Branagh made. He stars as Shakespeare, and Judi Dench stars as Anne or Agnes. It's a similar theme of Shakespeare after he ends his career in London, comes home, and how they're mourning the loss of their son. And it's about their relationship and their marriage. And I think it's a brilliant film. And there's also a series that is available through BritBox or one of those series called Upstart Crow. And Upstart Crow is a sort of a Monty Python version of this whole thing. So if you can imagine that, it was apparently created for some anniversary celebration by something like the BBC. So those both, All Is True and Upstart Crow, were all written by a British comedy writer, Ben Elton, it turns out. You can see I get carried away with research, but I would highly recommend All Is True because it's a different perspective of exactly what you have in this book. So
Saw that.
if you can, I have trouble coming across that. We do have, I think the book is available, but not the film, I forget. But Upstart Crow is actually a term taken from a person who wrote a critique of Shakespeare in 1592, who was kind of his competitor, called Robert Greene, and he trashed Shakespeare and called him an upstart crow. So that, I think that's a pretty interesting little phrase. So there you have my introduction. And I'd like to hear what everyone else thought about this book. Oh, I forgot to mention, everyone knows Kathy and her mother, Jane, who join us sometimes from the nursing home. They are not available because Kathy, I think, is traveling, but she sent me some notes and she said, she'll be here at the next meeting, both of them. We actually have a family connection to Shakespeare. And if you remember, Jane's last name is Combe, C-O-M-B. My great, etc. grandfather, John Combs, was a benefactor of Shakespeare. In later years, when Shakespeare had some money, he bought land from John Combs and his brother. Attached is a picture of the floor grave, and she sent me a picture, which anyone can find online. And she said, the reclining guy behind Shakespeare's grave is my great grandfather, thus grandfather. So that's kind of fun. And if you're interested, I did look up and someone's posted a more in-depth history of the family in Stratford, the Combe family. And you can read more about that. But I thought that was really fun that we have someone who actually sold land to Shakespeare in the group who couldn't make it, but will watch the video and will join us next time. So now I'd like to hear what you all thought about it. I know some of you haven't quite finished, but anyone have an opinion to start with?
Well, I think it's a wonderful book because it's dealing with so many aspects of motherhood and deep emotion. Of course, then there's the pandemic connection, which just happened. And I thought it was a fabulous read.
Yes, so the whole motherhood story, you can see why that one picture company is going to make a movie out of it.
Yes.
It fits with that, the times, and also the plague, as you point out.
And what a great character, Agnes. Just a great character, I think. So.
I saw it as a family story. And one thing I liked about it that I noticed, I don't know, halfway through whatever, that she never called Shakespeare by name. It was he, son, him, husband. And to me, that made it seem more of a family story. So that I mean, even though you knew it was William Shakespeare, that was the character, it made it almost like it could have been anybody in some ways. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah, it really brought it close, as if you're right there. I often felt in the book that it was really bringing the life of the times out. Did you feel that, some of that? And there are questions about why do you think she didn't name him, but that's a good point that it makes you feel more immediate in a way.
I agree about the family story. I thought that showing the pain of losing a child would be universal to a family, to a mother especially. And I thought that was handled well and part of the theme of the story. Yes.
How did people feel about, well, Agnes or Anne? Apparently, there are one document where her name is written as Agnes, but they would have pronounced it almost like Agnes, almost like Anne in the time.
Okay.
So how did people like her? Did you like the way she was presented? Nobody
Well,
has.
to have those special abilities, that special, being able to look at a person and touch their hand like that, and then kind of be able to see, that's what drew her to William Shakespeare in the first place, I guess you'd say. She saw greatness in him. But so having a gift, which you hear people say sometimes it's a gift and sometimes it's, a horrible thing to have that. So I think that brought that out as that was what she had going for her. Yes.
Yeah, she definitely was presented as a healer. Yes.
A lot of interesting features about Agnes, and we're first introduced to her when she's handling those bees. So she's, almost magically, not magically, but that's a great way to introduce her because she does. Did you get the impression that her reading ability was not, could she read? But she could do so many other things, especially the healing arts. That was great.
You mean
think?
writing?
Yeah.
Reading, writing? Yeah. I mean, when she wrote that note about that was rather sketchy. So yeah.
Yeah, and at one point,
Maybe
her son has to have his father read something because the mother can't quite get all the words right. So
Yeah.
I guess he was very superficially literate.
Mhm.
She was such a creature of the forest. That childbirth scene where she has to go back to the woods. Who of us would go lie down on a carpet of grass to have a baby? But I loved how she was able to use her herbs and her potions to cure people in the town and how she was respected for that. Though not by her stepmother. And there again is another theme, the evil stepmother.
Yes.
Yeah, she's kind of a feral creature, is the way I see it, or almost a witch,
Mhm.
her potion.
Mhm.
But she wasn't ostracized in that way, was she? It seemed like they needed her help. In those days, especially with the plague, what else would they be able to do? I saw, has anyone
Yes.
seen pictures of the doctors of the day? With
Oh,
those
yeah.
big
The ma-
horns? Really
Yeah.
scary looking. Those were apparently only available to the wealthiest people, not the regular people.
And they were misinformed because the plague mask did nothing to stop the transmission.
Yeah, actually, the
Right.
fleas were the way that plague was passed around. And what about that scene where they show the chain of events?
Oh, that was fabulous.
Oh, yeah.
I agree.
That was scary.
I loved that. As a retired microbiologist, I really enjoy epidemiology, and that was so well done.
Yeah, the
Well written.
gradual. I did read that there's actually a book about how the fleas brought the plague to Spain. Book that came out in, it's in a medical journal. I found a review. So in a sense, she took that whole scene from something that, obviously her research. It actually happened like that. The book is called Life in the Time of Pestilence, about the Great Castilian Plague. And it does specifically talk about the fleas bringing them in and killing 500,000 people. I mean, that number sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sadly,
that- During a time that the population of the world was much, much less.
Yeah.
Right. But now things can spread so much faster with airplanes.
Yeah. And yeah, even the 1918 flu came, they say, from Kansas to Europe and then back again during World War I.
There's a wonderful book called The Great Influenza by John Barrymore. It's a huge tome. And it actually started in Kansas because President Wilson wanted to have the soldiers kept in very tight quarters to build camaraderie so that they could go into battle more effectively. And that was the big trigger. And then they took it to Europe. And then the second onslaught did arise in Spain, but that was at the time of their civil war.
Yeah. And then it gets the name Spanish flu. from
Right.
that.
We missed another misnomer. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. Agnes is presented as quite a strange woman who paid little attention to convention and respectability. She cured a lot of people's illnesses with herbs and tinctures. How did this conform with or differ from your perception of Anne Hathaway? Does anyone have a perception of who Anne Hathaway was? Did anyone know anything about any of these characters before reading this book?
No.
No,
No.
John Shakespeare, William? I'll say that Anne kind of reminds me of some of the Shakespeare characters, like in the Midsummer Night's Dream, Titania,
Mhm.
and The Tempest,
Yes.
Miranda.
Yes.
She's sort of a fairy-like feral creature.
Mhm.
So that came through to me right away. Do you think they had a good marriage? In the book and in real life, or in real life? What do you think?
I think
So
they
talk-
brought a lot of their marriage. They brought an intense passion, intense physical passion, intense emotional and intellectual passion. But they both were products of difficult childhoods. And I think that definitely had an effect on the quality of their marriage.
Well, he sure was gone a lot.
Yeah.
Would any modern woman put up with that in a real marriage?
But he had to get away from his father.
Yeah.
Also, he
But
made money.
she seemed very
You seem to
nurturing.
understand me.
Yes.
Yeah, understanding and nurturing. So it seemed like that was more her role in the marriages, to make him a better, to help him get where he had to be. So,
Well, given their the disparity in their age, he was 18, she was 26.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
And she lived a lot longer. She lived
Yeah.
longer than he did.
Mm-hmm.
So her life outside of London, it must have been a pretty rough place to live in London with all of the rats and everything, the crowding,
Mm.
sewage situation, pollution, apparently. You wonder if that contributed to his early death. He
That-
seemed
that-
to,
The reason for trying to bring the family there, because she didn't think Judith would survive with all of her physical
Yeah.
ailments.
yeah.
I
And
thought
what
O'Farrell was,
Yeah,
I
go
thought
ahead.
O'Farrell was really good at bringing out details of London life and life on the farm as well. She just was very, very specific in terms of how awful it would be to be in the hold of a ship or on those back streets of London. Really good detail.
Yeah, that's what kind of brings it to life, isn't it? Would anyone have chosen to read this book if it weren't for this book group?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, I did.
a review on NPR, and it had gone on my radar. And as you all know by now, I had a really hard time getting a hold of it. I picked it up yesterday late morning. So I'm kind of behind you, and I don't mind the spoilers you're giving me. I will live with all of this.
Well, there's a lot to it besides just the basic plot, right? All that
Yes.
detail,
Mhm.
so it's worth reading.
Like that relationship between the twins. I mean, that was a pretty interesting part to me.
Can you go?
Can I elaborate? Just that for Hamnet to really offer himself. I mean, he probably knew he was a little boy, but he must have known that if he crawled into bed with his sick sister, he would probably get sick. And yet he did it anyway. And then even changed up his clothes so he would be viewed as his sister. They probably had some kind of special connection. I don't know. I'm not a twin myself, so I can't speak to that. But does anybody know twins that have do they have extra special connections? Any twins you know? I don't know.
My mother and her twin was male. And even though they just looked like siblings, they did have a very unusual bond. And when my uncle passed, it was extremely difficult for my mother, who outlived him by almost 10 years. But then that's typical male pattern.
What do you think about Shakespeare's relationship to the rest of his family? You know, his father was kind of a businessman who did some bad things and got in trouble for it. And one reason I like that Michael Wood's program is he really explains all of that and shows you that he was sort of hiding wool that he shouldn't have had, and was selling it and made a ton of money. But then he was mayor of Stratford for a while and then ended up being disgraced. And Shakespeare himself, I mean, he really accomplished a lot when you think about this as this 18-year-old kid. And then he goes to London, makes a lot of money, came back and bought the second biggest house in town, which Maggie O'Farrell has in the book. Except from what Michael Wood said, or one of the places I read said the house was in such disrepair they couldn't live in it. So you can imagine what a mess that was to fix up. And then he did buy a lot of property, and he actually bought a coat of arms, which his father had failed to do early on. His father tried to, but failed. So that's quite an accomplishment for a young man. Does anyone
Well,
question? Sorry, go on.
as a young man, he had fallen under his father's shadow in terms of how he was viewed by his stepmother and by people in the town. They didn't think that an 18-year-old could accomplish anything, that he wasn't strong enough to build a farm, or I think she was the only one that perceived the depth of his intellect and that there was a lot he could accomplish. Nobody else saw that.
I
Yeah,
think his sister did, I think.
his sister
Suzanne.
and maybe Bartholomew supporting Agnes. But I don't know, this idea that Shakespeare wasn't who Shakespeare was, which Maggie O'Farrell's presenting him as the original. The idea that it had to be someone from the upper class who was better educated, I just revolt about that concept.
I do.
Well, you know what? Go ahead, Carol.
Creativity is not always necessarily a reflection of class or education, as we know. And I agree. I've read about this since I was in high school. Christopher Marlowe, Francis Bacon. For some reason, because of this massive body of work, they don't want to give him credit for that. As far as Francis Bacon is concerned, he was such a moralist. And we do know that a lot of Shakespeare's plays have elements of bawdiness. Christopher Marlowe is credited with him, but Christopher Marlowe did not think in iambic pentameter, and Shakespeare did. The uniqueness of his sonnets, always his own rhyme scheme with the quatrain at the end. And I just don't see any other person in history, but there are those who are far more educated than I am who probably disagree, but that's more with my heart than my head.
Yeah, it just seems a lot of the scholars do agree with you. A lot of
Well,
them do.
You remember the John Harris book group? It must have been in this last summer when we read about Elizabeth Smith,
Yes,
who and these, well, she was a woman cryptologist, I guess one could say. But when she started her research, she was hired by this, what was his name, Fabian or something like that, to prove that Shakespeare's writings were actually written by Francis Bacon. And remember, they spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to prove that. And of course, that was never proven. So, but I kind of forgotten about that until somebody mentioned that earlier. But yeah, interesting correlation.
yeah, that was in the suburb, was it Glen, it was west of Chicago. Which suburb was that? Where
It
they had a
was,
settlement. And he was paying people, the rich guy was paying all those people to try to figure it out, and they all sort of started laughing at him in the end. At least that was my impression.
Paper
Yeah.
settlement, Naperville?
No,
no,
Yes.
but
little
In
by
that
by
area.
the river, I think.
By the river. Yeah, near south of Elgin in that area, or
Yeah.
wasn't that it?
Yeah, that's a really fun book to read.
yeah.
But yeah, that was his goal, was to prove that Francis Bacon was really the author of the Shakespeare plays.
And he had all kinds of researchers working, you know, and just doing minute
Trying to find,
dissection of different language and whatever, and it never was proven. So anyway, but yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
yeah. And they did a PBS program on that too.
Yeah,
Did everyone see that? Yeah.
that was well done.
Yeah.
So obviously Maggie O'Farrell, she did a ton of research apparently. And she went with the idea that he was who he was, having gone to visit Stratford and the whole thing.
You know, Maggie O'Farrell is an I don't know, not too long ago, I read a book that she had written, and it was sort of a memoir type called I Am, 17 Brushes with Death.
Yeah.
And it was a whole different type of book than this one, obviously. But I
Yep.
just connected the name recently.
You're right, and from what, I haven't read that book, but I understand that her kids had some real health problems.
Yeah, she's
And
been
she
through a
did as
lot.
a child, didn't she have encephalitis or something like that?
Yeah, I don't remember now the details, but obviously there were 17 brushes with death, so she had a few.
Yeah, so that really is how she can write from the heart about the
Yeah,
sickness in the book.
Yeah.
And the pain and the grief, a lot of that.
I think her portrayal of grief was just almost unforgettable.
I agree.
She reached out not only to describe Agnes' grief, but the children's grief and Mary, the mother's grief. You could really identify with what they were feeling.
And blaming themselves. She was blaming herself for not having figured things out earlier or done something to make a difference. Isn't that so normal with mothers especially?
well, and Shakespeare's mother, Mary, had two daughters die either very
Yeah.
young and so that was really a tragedy. I think I had to kind of write down the names of the characters to keep the family straight, but I think there was one sister, Eliza, that was pretty important character in the book, but she, I think the mother, Mary, was just very saddened by obviously the loss of two other daughters.
It must have been just the way life was back then. I know. It's- So
That's why
people survived.
for the 19th century, that's why so many people had large families, because very few children survived
Yeah.
until antibiotics. That changed the world.
Yeah. Well, has anyone been to Shakespeare's house?
Yes. And the interesting thing was I just got out the album that I'd made. My daughter and I took a trip to England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. It was kind of a neat trip, but we did spend time in Stratford, and there's, you can see Shakespeare's house and also Anne Hathaway's, and I don't know if anybody else has been there, but they're beautiful buildings. I don't know what you call it. They're not exactly half timbered, but they're almost whole timber with timber and stucco or whatever it is, but absolutely beautiful homes and of course thatched roofs. And yeah, I was really taken with the houses and beautiful place.
And I
And
think
it's been restored very nicely, obviously.
yeah, and
probably-
Anne Hathaway's cottage, is that where that garden is? Or
Yes, yeah.
yeah, so there's a good beginning for this character in the book, the garden.
Yes, that's true.
In the whole thing. And I was reading about the reconstruction of the Globe Theatre in London, and when they redid it, they tried to be as close as possible within the law to reconstructing it. They found over 1,000 pine trees around England, and they had to choose just the right ones for the pillars, and they were forced to use cranes and things to lift things up because of the current law. But a lot of the techniques they used were the old techniques. And then they had to get a special permission to put on a thatched roof because that's against the law now in London. Because of course, fire hazard.
Fire code, yeah.
Yeah, also, the interesting thing about the theater is they said in Shakespeare's time, they did try to, they studied really well the structure of it and tried to reproduce it. But in his day, they would have crammed 3,000 people in to see a play. And today they're only allowed to have 1,500. So picture that, a lot of them standing in the middle to see these plays. And not only that, their Globe Theater site says when it's really hot every year, a bunch of people faint who are standing in the middle. And they said the most they had was like 12 one year for Titus Andronicus. So just picture going to the plays back then and, you know, here's Shakespeare being an actor and writing the plays. And apparently, in again, Michael Woods, I think it's the Michael Woods where they set the context of going to the theater in London. You'd go out and you'd go to the whorehouse and then you'd go to the theater. And basically it was just sort of wild entertainment. It wasn't considered highbrow the way we think of it today. It was not. So it's kind of a different situation. And you think that's why his family back in Stratford in the book doesn't really understand what he's doing? Because a couple of the questions that I read said that his family, it seems, disconnected from what's going on in London, what he's doing, and writing plays and that sort of thing. And do you think that has to do with the fact that it wasn't necessarily considered up and up?
Could, certainly could.
They might not have ever having seen anything like that before themselves, because like you say, that getting to London was a novelty. And then if it wasn't considered socially, you know, the higher class thing to do, I guess I'd say. Yeah, makes sense.
But then they did do plays for Elizabeth, but special productions, right? And they did have the King's Men. And they did apparently have a lot of traveling theater during the plague years. So they wanted to get outside of London. So there, it was something in the culture, but I don't know. It's also interesting. Somewhere I heard Susanna's married a Puritan. Does anyone know about that? The older sister. And they disapprove of the theater, I would think.
Yes.
I think in the early days of those theaters, women were not even allowed in. And then people who were more sophisticated would sit up in the galleries, and the groundlings who only had to pay a penny to get in came in. And O'Farrell touches on that with people bringing in chickens, and they often would bring, she doesn't mention this, but they would often bring eggs. And if they didn't like the play that was going on, they would throw at the actors. The fact that no women were on stage, it was all men. It's interesting. We all bring our own experiences to what we read. And she had that wonderful comparison of how John's finished gloves that had the pearls or the jewels on them, that the finished product didn't indicate the work that went in behind it, and compared that to Shakespeare saying, if the finished production doesn't reveal all the hard work that went in behind it. I used to direct high school theater, and you prayed that the finished product would not indicate all the chaos that had gone on behind the scenes.
Wow, that must have been some experience. I've just been hearing about the Sturgeon Bay production of Les Miserables using Zoom. So that's, I guess you can see that play. They're going to be showing it somewhere online, but it costs $5 to view it. If anyone's interested, we can find out more about it from our children's librarian, whose son is a star in that production. What did you think about the end of this, where Agnes goes to London, sneaks into London to see the play? Adele, close your ears.
Yeah.
I think it helped her. I think it helped her have almost some closure to understand he did feel the pain that she felt.
Yeah, yes, the ending where he puts himself, he's the ghost, he's really becoming, where Hamnet had taken the place of Judith in the play, Shakespeare is really taking Hamlet's place, and I don't know, something like that.
I really liked that part, that you know, she finally got to see what was going on. I just thought that was a great way to kind of close the book. And I like that part. That was good.
It was very sudden, though, her conversion at the end, as was conversion the first time they slept together after she had realized he had innumerable infidelities and how quickly she succumbed. And it was interesting, I think, because she is somewhat of a compulsive nature, that both were very rapid conversions.
Yeah, that's a good point that she was.
But you have to wonder if that's part of the time that they lived too. Like for a woman, if she were to leave him, what's she gonna do? You know, they have the whole woman, man, you know, being married and not married.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were a lot of women who put up with what's the word? Husbands that sleep around, you know, there was probably a lot of women that put up with that because that was the only way they'd have a home and a life and food and be taken care of.
Yeah, and inheritance, how did
They
that?
have to be
work into the whole thing?
That's interesting that the house that he builds for her seems to indicate a couple of different things. It spoke to the town that he had accomplished something, that there was status in his life. Look at this special house I'm able to build for my family. And she really wasn't interested in the house, but she loved the chance to build the garden. And I wondered, Jane, when you saw it, have they recreated the gardens?
There was a garden, yes. Yeah, and it was.
And he not only did he buy that big house, but he also got the coat of arms, which was a way of really cementing his
Status.
success. You know, so he moved up in society after his father had messed up the family legacy, really. And apparently, actually, the Arden family also had some problems. So he was working against all of that, his mother's family.
Yeah.
So if you watch that Michael Wood program, you'll learn all those things. But how about the last line taken from Hamlet, remember me?
Yeah.
That's a good way to end it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not, but in the other play, the play about this, all is true. Susanna marries a Puritan, and supposedly Susanna, being the older one after Hamnet dies, her husband will inherit everything from Shakespeare. And there's a joke about how a Puritan will inherit everything from a playwright, which was considered, you know, outrageous to the Puritans. I don't know if that's true, but apparently Susanna had some children, a daughter. They all, and also then Judith married and had some children, but they all died childless, or there's no heirs to the Shakespeare line. So that's kind of tragic in a way, isn't it?
That's sad. Yeah.
You know, those of you that know more about Shakespeare than I do, you know, I visited the castle in Denmark where Hamlet took place, you know, and how would Shakespeare know about this Denmark and the castle? And you wouldn't think that he would have that opportunity to travel. Am I right, Mary? Or those of you that know about, the play Hamlet takes place in Denmark, right?
Yes.
He took a lot of his plays from books, like what was the name of the author? Hollingshead? I forget now. And also Ovid. And he did have a classical education early on. He went to the local school, which he learned Latin and all of the classics. And then when his father lost his business because of the corruption, he was not able to continue. But he had a very strong early education and did read all the classics. So a lot of those, I think they can trace Hamlet to some of those. And that's why I wonder, you know, they're trying to make this thing that the play Hamlet, people argue the play Hamlet is based on Hamnet, but that name did exist in other plays, in other books. So Does anyone buy that story? Any-
His lack of travel is brought up many times by those who feel that he was not responsible. He did not write all these plays. And they also cite the fact that many of his plays take place in Italy. And there's no evidence that he ever traveled there. So, but again, if someone has read,
Yeah.
well read, then,
You can travel from your chair.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're here today.
Well, and apparently, that's one interesting thing is apparently there's those lost years where they don't know exactly what he was doing. But
Mhm.
again, if you watch the Michael Wood program, he speculates that he was off teaching school in Lancashire or some such thing. So he had some education and obviously used it.
Mhm.
And I think in this book, Maggie O'Farrell has drawn that out and making him a Latin teacher, right?
Yes.
As a young man.
Yeah.
He's apparently done that same research. So,
Does anybody have an idea why Maggie O'Farrell did not use Shakespeare's name? Is there any clue why wouldn't she, why did she refer to him as the Latin teacher? You know, his name was never brought up. Anybody have any ideas on that or?
Well, it's more a book about her. It's not a book about him, I think. That's why, just,
Yeah.
it's about her and the children much more than about William.
Yeah, I
And that-
agree. I think the focus is on the family, and if his name had been in there, that might have just automatically made him the star of the story. And she wanted the
Ah.
family
A
to be
good
in the
point.
focus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That's what I think too.
I wish they would have called
Yeah.
her Anne Hathaway though. That was, it was, I don't know.
instead of
Should have used her
Should have
name
act-
rather than if she was the star. I mean, was it
why does
just,
that bother you?
I don't know. I think Anne Hathaway is a lovely name and Agnes is not such a nice name, but that's my prejudice.
But it wasn't with a GN, like Agnes.
Yeah, that's what I read, that's how it would have been pronounced,
Yeah,
almost like Agnes.
Yes.
And maybe it was a story meant to not be understood by people who are real scholars of Shakespeare. So someone like me who didn't know anything about it, I just accepted everything I read as what it was, you know, on face
Yeah.
value.
I think you're
So-
on, yeah, me too. I am not a scholar.
Me too.
And I thought, well, of course that's her. Just gave her a new name.
This must be how it is, yes, yeah. Right.
Literally.
It's a way of saying
that-
to the reader, now I'm just using my imagination. This is not.
This is-
yeah,
This is how it might have been.
yeah. Obviously, you know, it's historical fiction, I think, with the emphasis on the fiction
Yeah,
rather than the history. And maybe that probably is part of it too.
and we read a lot of historical fiction in this group. And I remember a few, maybe years or a year ago or something, there was brought up, I think when we might have been doing some of that Hemingway stuff with Paul McLean, that
Mhm.
I remember coming across some articles written by journalists who feel that historical fiction is wrong because it presents a false view of history that people take to heart. What do you think about that? And
I'm
this,
shocked with that.
That's too bad.
yeah, I
That's
mean, so
sad.
much of us love historical fiction, but some of these rigid journalists who think everything has to be researched and fact-based. But this is a way of signaling to the reader that it's not going to be like that. You know, you shouldn't expect it to be fact-based. She doesn't even use his name. Although she repeats Agnes in
It's
there. a lot.
facts anyway. I mean, the fact providers also can present some facts and not others. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I've always loved historical fiction.
I
Very
can pull up
much.
these articles. I found them
Me too.
very wrong. My opinion was that person was really too rich.
Yeah.
But there were like 3 different articles on that subject. So I was amazed because I love historical fiction. And I love how it brings the feeling of the story, makes you empathetic.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
historical fiction makes it accessible to the non-scholar. I would never pick up, I think, unlikely to pick up a book about Shakespeare, a biography of Shakespeare's wife. That's unlikely to have attracted my attention. And likewise, with Hemingway books, I would unlikely to have been picked up a biography of his various wives. Him maybe, but not the wives. But those books put me into the mode and the life of Hemingway and his family, his personal life, very, very nicely, fiction or no.
Yeah. And really they draw on our empathy and pull us into stories are a way of telling everything these days.
And I
Right.
think all of
Yeah.
us know enough to say, well, it could have been this way, or the circumstances, the language, those aren't the dialect that was used, but certainly that circumstance occurred.
But I think you need to keep that in mind when you read memoirs and historical fiction, that it is kind of made up and can be stretched.
Mhm.
So I think the reader has to keep that in mind. Yes.
Well, and
Adjusted.
you have to come to it seeing that there are pillars of truth, or, you know, situations that this really happened, but what was said and how the characters felt, you have to bring that knowledge that that's invented as you read it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think she really did that as a technique to keep it in the realm of fiction. How did you like the whole structure of the book, the way she was jumping from one time to another time, and was it difficult or did she work pretty well?
So well. A lot of writers can't
Everyone's shaking heads here.
did extremely well.
Yeah.
And
I like it.
I think she did a very smooth job of doing that. It was easy, and yet you have to be a fairly sophisticated reader to cope with that. You know,
Yeah.
if you're trying to get teenagers to read who are lukewarm about reading to start with, that would be a lost cause. They'd get lost in the time switch. But people who read on a regular basis, or who, you know, as I said, are fairly sophisticated readers, I don't think that's a challenge. And she did it beautifully.
Well, and the interesting thing about the time switch, you know, there was maybe only 10 or 20 years difference between the 2 time periods. In most of the books that you read where there's time, there might be 100 years or 50 years, and that's real easy to keep straight. But in the beginning, I was a little bit confused. Now, who were the brothers and who were the, you know, the kids? And then of course there was Agnes's family, and when was when. And so yeah, once I got that all kind of squared away in my mind, yeah, it was a good strategy to use, but it was to be confusing when it was such a brief period of time between the 2 time periods she was talking about.
And you had to get family trees fairly
That's
clear.
what I had to do. That's what I had to do.
But that seems to be a
Who
popular.
belongs to who?
too. So we have to learn how to, I wish they put like a little flag, the date. Some authors do that, you know, because
Yeah.
yes, in the beginning, at least in the beginning, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah.
But it seemed to work for me better than some that do this.
Mhm.
Because I listened to the book actually, and I was able to pick up on the time change pretty quickly. Sometimes, as someone said, the authors will put the chapter title as the year or something like that to make it very clear, but I didn't have any of that, and I was able to pick up on it pretty quickly. So she really illustrated her characters well in the time periods, I think, pretty well.
Gave us the clues. Mhm. Maybe that's part of it, because you have to watch for the clues. So that makes it even more, it draws you in more. Because you're looking, okay, where are we now? What are the clues that I'm looking for? You know, to keep me interested, yes.
Yeah,
I get that.
basically, what did they have? Agnes when she's young, and then Agnes when she meets Will, and
As a
then
mom.
when she has the kids, and then after the death. So a bunch of different
Yeah,
time
yeah.
periods, and not straight, not told in a linear
No.
fashion.
I will watch out for that.
But does that allow you to see the story differently? The fact that she's showing different time periods, how does that change your view of the story than if she had told it in a linear fashion? It gives you some.
Whenever I've read an author that does that, to me, what it does is it says, this is how it's going to, this is what's going to happen. But then when you bounce back in time, you're looking for, okay, how does that come
Right.
about? I
Yeah.
know this is going to happen, but how did that come about, you know? So you're kind of looking for ideas and.
For
Well,
example,
you know, it's a strategy that's so often used by authors now. It's a very popular strategy. And sometimes when the going gets really tough in one time period, they switch to another time period where it's not so tough. And then they go back, you know, I think if it was in a linear fashion, it would be maybe a long haul till you got to a better time period. I'm saying that in not a very intellectual way, I know, but that's just how I see it.
You're saying that we know the hero survives, even though during what we've been reading, he might not, you know, so this is the way, you know.
or the opposite.
I don't know.
We know that Hamnet dies, but then we're back there and his sister is very sick and the mother's worrying about her. So we're all like, no, don't pay attention to her.
She'll be fine.
It kind of builds a tension in a way, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Well, you know, one of the words in there that I thought was interesting was bubo. Bubo?
Mhm.
Okay, I had to look that one up. I
Those are
thought, is that a real word? Yes, it is. It's the inflammation of the lymphatic gland. I had never heard of that, and I thought it looked like such a silly word, but it was real.
What was the word again? B-U?
The buboes,
Bubo.
yeah, the patients develop
Just
those,
swelling
their
on the neck.
lymphatic, which is the neck, the armpits and the groin.
Is that the basis of bubonic plague, the word?
Is
That's-
typical plague. Yeah, Yersinia pestis is the agent that causes it. It's an anaerobic organism. It's hideous. Yeah. Horrible.
Was that indicative that when those once appeared, that it was pretty much a lost cause?
Yes.
There was not anything they could.
That Judith's recovery is somewhat miraculous in that you have this metaphysical change with Hamnet. And the fact that she was a child who from birth struggled, you talked about convulsions, asthma, and she survived and he did not.
Yeah.
So what was it, divine intervention or, you know, you don't know, but she survived. And once the doctor came with the mask, it was usually all over because a lot of times the physicians wouldn't even come.
Sure.
And the mask was ridiculous, of course. It just frightened people because they thought that there were vapors in the room that caused the transmission when it's a flea. It's a viral vector disease. It has to have a vector, like a rodent or humans, whatever.
Yeah. Well, does anyone have anything? We're up in an hour now. Anything else to add? How did you like the book in general? Everyone seems
I
favorable.
really liked it. Yes.
Yeah, I liked it too. And it's not a book I would have chosen. But no, I liked it.
I loved this book. I thought it was.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what about that cover? What does that?
Yeah.
say?
What is,
Love
what
it.
feather is that revealed in the novel? The feather across his eyes?
That's
he has
just,
that
he's
bird.
the writer.
Oh, yeah, quill, a writing quill.
Yes,
Oh,
Yeah.
but I thought it wasn't from the kestrel. You know, she kept,
Yeah.
kept the kestrel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's right. Yeah.
Multiple meaning.
as you can see, I'm near the beginning.
I am. mine who his biology teacher specializes in ornithology. And I haven't heard back from him if this could be the feather of a kestrel.
Ah, okay.
Just wanted to say one other thing. I shouldn't talk too much because I'm new. I
Oh,
think
that's all right.
prose in this book is so beautiful. I have not read anything this well written since All the Light We Cannot See, which was another book that was almost poetic, not prose. This is extremely well written,
Mhm.
just beautifully done.
I have to agree.
Well, I'll agree with you. And you think it's, worthy of Shakespeare's,
Yes.
worthy. By the way,
Will
so
it be a film? You're the one who keeps up with this. Is it have to be a film?
yes, it
Oh,
is going to
good.
be a film. I mentioned that in the beginning. It's been optioned by a group called the Hera Pictures.
Excellent. I look
So,
forward.
so will Anne Hathaway play Anne Hathaway, do you think?
So I did, I'll throw something else out there. Probably all familiar with the Folger Shakespeare Library. We have almost a new set because our copies of Shakespeare were really old and yellow. So I've been buying these. They're beautiful copies. Have a look at them when you're in the library. But also I was at the Folger Shakespeare Library website. And they have a whole bunch of programs that are free. You just have to sign up, and a lot of them are book discussions. They do a monthly book discussion on books that are related to Shakespeare subjects. And this was one of them that they did last year. So if you're
Oh.
interested in that, have a look at their website. You can join some of those discussions there. I thought I was intrigued by it, but I don't know if I have the time. with
What was the
everything else going.
site?
It's the Folger Shakespeare Library. I don't know the exact URL, but you could Google Folger Shakespeare Library and then look at the events that they have. They have a
Where
lot of
is-
discussions too.
Where is the physical presence of, where is that library located?
Isn't it in Washington?
DC.
It is in Washington DC.
Yeah. And as I say, these are really beautiful new books. Since we have the Dora Shakespeare and everything, I figured we need to keep collection up to date. So I hope people will check them out.
Okay.
Or Laura will get in trouble.
So,
Okay, I need to go. Paul coming in from Switzerland, but good to see everybody. See you next month.
okay,
Yeah,
thank
so long, Adele.
thank you all for coming, and thank you to the new people. Please come back.
Thank
Good to
Good
see
night.
everybody. Bye
Thanks.
now.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Laura.